Ochelli Effect is sponsored by WallStreetWindow.com and listeners like you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media, Chuck Ochelli.
Strange to be here on a Monday, believe it or not. I haven't done a Monday in a while, so I was taking a break and all that stuff, you guys know. Anyway, it is the 6th day of February 2023. Allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar, and this is the show you were looking for. How do I know that? Because you're hearing me say what I'm saying. Anyway, Monday, as I said, Moon Day, the first broadcast day of the week. Yeah, definitely unusual for me, but that's all right. I'll tell you something else that's unusual is, since I wanted to kick things into a different direction on the network, I figured we should bring back some people we need to bring back and introduce you to some new stuff. So, combination of both here in this hour. Why? Well, you guys should be, if you've been listening to my show for a while, familiar with Albert Lanier, veteran journalist. His locale is Hawaii. I always find that interesting anyway. Somebody who chooses to live on a volcano, I got respect for him. What can I say? It is what it is, but, and I consider the entirety of Hawaii a volcano. I think geologically that might be correct. But anyway, that's not the point of tonight's discussion. And I love talking to Albert Lanier. You can check out his independent writings. He's been an independent journalist, written for many different publications, magazines, newspapers over the years. And I've talked to him about a great many subjects. All right. Tonight, though, we're getting into one. I gotta say, I haven't done an exclusive time on this particular subject. I've talked about it in brief on a couple of shows with a couple of people that were interested in it. But I never, decided to do even a full hour on it before. So I figured, let's bring back somebody you're familiar with and get into a topic I don't usually get into, and let's roll that way. Okay? D.B. Cooper. Now, that is the infamous case. If you're not familiar with the D.B. Cooper case, the mystery, etc., if you're not familiar with the stuff that's come out in the past couple of years where all of a sudden possibly a woman is now being named as D.B. Cooper, various people have been accused of being this skyjacker. Okay, not somebody who crashed a plane into anything, somebody who allegedly I say again, because things have not been found, although there has been pieces of money found. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Jumped out of an airplane, okay, and with a parachute on, according to witnesses, after skyjacking or hijacking or whatever it is you want to call it, and stealing a bunch of money and jumping out of an airplane, and disappeared. Not to have been heard from again. Or maybe that's what we're told, that he was never heard from again, or she now. The story is twisted, weird, continues to grow. People like Clyde Lewis, matter of fact, that's another interesting one, on Ground Zero Radio, right? He's talked about D.B. Cooper a lot. When I interviewed him a couple of months ago, he brought it up. It's one of those perpetual mysteries to him, one that he's interested in, and I figured you guys also might be. I know I find it interesting every time I see a documentary or something. I stop and I look, but I figure let's look at this through the eyes of a veteran journalist. So back to Albert Lanier, and we'll tell you about his YouTube channel. And let's see, you were at the Dr. 50 on. Oh boy, was that Substack? I don't know. You know what? I'm going to give you guys show links here. If you check out the show notes, there'll be links to Albert Lanier's writing, his most recent stuff as an independent journalist still, sort of retired, then maybe not so retired. Also on YouTube, giving instructions to people about journalism in general, and his YouTube channel that he launched a couple of years ago, I think. I don't know. Maybe it was last year. You know, time is bending for me in a strange way. Anyway, let me shut up. Albert Lanier. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm all right, and just a bit of a word on the YouTube channel, which is one of the reasons I'm here. I'm on a media tour, which is what I call it. I do like a bunch of shows within a space of time, like this month in February. So this is my media tour, quote-unquote, for 2023, and so I did a show yesterday. I'm doing this today. I don't know what others I'm doing, but and so I'm here to promote my YouTube channel, which is called Writer Albert Lanier. That's Writer Albert Lanier. Mm-hmm. And basically, initially was a writing channel last year. I started last year. Never been on YouTube before. but I revamped it this January, just recently, and it's true crime and film, so film and true crime, because those are the things I've often got interviewed about more recently, the past couple of years, so I decided to do that. So, and I have a series called Looking Into, where I do talk about D.B. Cooper, or as I call it, Dan Cooper, because that was the name he originally gave, and D.B. Cooper is a mistake. So, but yeah, that's what I'm here for. Here on my media tour, and I'm here to promote my YouTube channel, writer Albert Lanier.
Well, and I'm glad you are, because frankly, some of the most interesting discussions I've had with you, in my mind, and we've had a few over the years, did have to do with true crime. I mean, we covered the death of a singer on this show. I forget which other crime. I know we covered a couple of crimes, but good.
Yeah, Sam Cooke.
Sam Cooke, right. I forget which other crimes, but Sam Cooke was the singer, which is a very interesting case, very mysterious, actually, if you take a look at it. You and I could talk about the death of any singers, actually. If you want to do true crime,
there are some suspicious ones. That's a whole other a bit of a rabbit hole with the music industry.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And I've been on shows. I've looked into Bobby Fuller. In fact, I wrote about it in my blog. My blog's not around anymore. And by the way, I should note that I actually wrote. It was a second anniversary article for my blog. I don't do my blog anymore. I did it for 4 years.
Right.
And that's the one at medium.com, at the Dr. 50 at medium.com. And I wrote a piece, a second anniversary article, about the Dan Cooper, or D.B. Cooper, as is mistakenly known. I believe it was called No Funny Stuff or I'll Do the Job, Hanging with Mr. Cooper.
Nice.
And I won't say the rest, but that comes from the note. No Funny Stuff or I'll Do the Job. So if people want to check that out after the show, medium.com, I think it's medium.com at the Dr. 50.
Yeah, it's medium.com and then the slash and then the @ symbol, the Dr. 50, which I thought was a weird web address when you got it, but I've given that out. I'll give that out, the YouTube channel address, direct links, so you guys will be able to click on them, a hyperlink right from the show notes when I'm done here, and it's out as a podcast, which is as most people do listen to it. Not a lot of live listeners anymore, seems like.
That's a shame.
Yeah, times change, though. I mean, everything is on demand, and but your blog is still available for people to read. It's just that you're not.
Yeah, people can read. Yeah, I just don't write it anymore. I stopped after about 4 years and enjoyed writing it, but got to move on.
Right, and I love the fact that you started out with journalism on that channel, but I think you and I are going to have more frequent discussions if you're going to delve into true crime stuff, because. And again, the whole rabbit hole with the music industry, I mean, look, Albert, we could begin, right, with Robert Johnson, couldn't we? Right? The original member of the 27 Club, and a lot of people don't even know that name anymore, but the inventor of the Delta Blues, effectively. The guy who was first recorded really only did 2 actual recording sessions, and then died at the age of 27, and frankly, 2 major producers went and tried to find him to re-record with him, to only find that he had died some years before. His death is loaded with mystery. Even the notes on the back of his death certificate are bizarre. And there's the first member of the 27 Club, and then you could go all the way to Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse, and
yeah, that's one I have to do for my Looking Into series, which is short form content.
Right.
It's less than 20 minutes, and I have to admit, when it comes to my channel, it's very simple. I'm sitting in my apartment talking about, for Looking Into, that's a true crime. My film series, I have a new film series called Film Forum. I do a little bit of analysis into films. So, yeah, it's all simple stuff. Nothing complex, just straightforward, by sitting on a bench in my apartment talking about this stuff.
Well, sounds good, but tonight sitting in are you sitting in your apartment on that bench now?
Not on the bench, no, but I am in my apartment, definitely.
Okay. Well, either way, you're in your apartment, and D.B. Cooper, as you said, inaccurately described as D.B. Cooper, but that's what the name everybody knows, right? And right. I recall even, I think Leonard Nimoy, I think was the first time I saw this, maybe when he was doing that In Search Of, right?
Absolutely.
that's the first time I heard about it, because what year did the events that took place that lead to the legend and the reality of D.B. Cooper, what year was that began?
It began in November of 1971, specifically November 24th, 1971.
Okay.
In the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man who identified himself at a ticket counter for Northwest Orient as Dan Cooper, not DB. That was a later error that was done by in a newspaper. I think it was for a suspect or something like that, or someone else, and they put DB Cooper instead of Dan, and that had gone out the wire and got picked up by some newspapers, and that's why people know him as DB. The exact name that was given by the individual who went on the flight was Dan Cooper. And this Dan Cooper, in November of 1971, November 24th to be exact, had gone into Portland International Airport in the afternoon, around 4 p.m. supposedly, and paid about $20 to get a flight to get a seat on flight 305 of Northwest Orient that was going from Portland to Seattle.
Okay,
right?
so one thing I want to jump in with here real fast is that first of all, I've always heard that there was some note taken by somebody in the FBI or the Secret Service, one or the other, that the DB originated with, but I don't know that for a fact. One thing I do know for a fact, though, is that part of the legend is that D.B. Cooper was dressed very well, and I keep saying DB because that's how I know it. But I wasn't born until 5 months later, so what are you going to do? The thing is this. People, when they went on airlines back then, though, would actually dress up, right? So it wasn't unusual that this suspect, this man, Dan Cooper, is actually dressed pretty well, and he's buying a ticket with cash, which I think is very typical for the time period. You know, it's not like today where you run through, the TSA and all this, okay? So I'm just trying to set the scene for people. In 1971, you might have put on a suit to go on an airplane. Go ahead.
I would say minimal to non-existent on some of these airliners. Even though, and it's interesting, according to, I was looking at this video, and it's part of my, sort of additional research.
Right.
And it noted that between 1968 and 1972, you had at least 130 planes that were hijacked. That's about one, and I think they gave it was about one per week.
Right.
And it was interesting because the FAA, I heard, was looking to possibly build an airport just for hijacked planes, so where hijacked planes can land.
Right. Well, but that's another piece of context for the time, right? That should be mentioned here is that even though people today are familiar with the idea that we should be worried about hijackers and stuff like that, it was a way more common occurrence at this time, and still security was lax. I mean, there were plenty of hijackings in the 60s and in 1970. All sorts of different things. Take this plane to Cuba. It was almost a common trope.
Right, because that was seen as an instrument of, it was really tied often to politics. A lot of, I don't want to say guerrilla groups, but a lot of political groups. I'm not going to use the term terrorism because I think that's that's a choice. That depends on your context. It depends on how you see it. One man's, as the saying goes, one man's terrorist group is another man's freedom fighter. However you want to see that.
Right.
But a number of politically active paramilitary groups would often use hijacking a plane as an instrument of political expression and of putting forth agendas. So that wasn't unusual in the late 60s and early 70s, as I mentioned, from 1968 to 1972.
Right.
According to one I had seen, 130 planes hijacked. Right. So you're looking at least a hijacking per week for this, roughly, 4 or 5 year period.
Right.
Something like
I
the
read
Dan Cooper hijacking would be unusual.
Right. No, I've just read that every 10 days, basically, that there was a hijacking for a certain time period. It's probably a similar statistic to what you're talking about. Either way, split the difference between us. You're talking about a common occurrence, actually, and still, there wasn't this grand call from the public, say, bring us security. We need more security, even though planes were actually being hijacked constantly, right? I just want to point that out.
What I understand is that the airlines themselves were very often skittish about security. They didn't want to from what I understand, they didn't want to introduce security measures.
Right.
I guess they didn't want to inhibit passengers. I guess also the fear was maybe that if you would bring in security, you kind of scare off people. That's just my take.
Right.
That you scare off potential passengers because they're like, really? You need to go through these guards and searches and all that. And they wanted to make it as smooth, I guess, an experience for passengers. Right.
No, fair enough.
That's my particular take.
No, fair enough. And I want you to get back to the story, though, because we're in 1971, but I wanted to set the stage that we're talking about a completely different time period. That's all. Unlike today. So, but go ahead.
So, as I mentioned before, we have this individual, Dan Cooper, who's gone into Portland International Airport, paid for a flight on a seat on the flight 305 of Northwest Orient from Portland to Seattle. Now, this individual, according to the flight crew and passengers on the flight, was wearing dark clothing. Dark trench coat, dark jacket, black tie, white shirt, dark shoes, dark clothing in general, right? All dark clothing, right? And so he was basically wearing a business suit, formal wear, right? Anything that you would see kind of your basic kind of business person, depending on the business person, right? Where maybe like a salesman, a minor executive manager or some sort,
but
what have you.
But blending in general with the passengers is what is the other point. So yeah, go ahead.
Because that was the impression. He didn't stand out.
Right.
When he went on the flight, nothing about him stood out. So we had this guy wearing basically business suit, trench coat. Something I saw was possibly he was wearing loafers, it looked like. So he's on this flight. This flight reportedly had about 36 passengers, so not a lot of people on this flight. And basically what happened during the flight, once they got underway, is he gave, there were at least two flight attendants, Florence Schaffner and Tina Mutlow. He gave Florence Schaffner a note. And notice at the time, it wasn't unusual for flight attendants to be hit on.
Mm-hmm.
I'll use the term propositioned. After all, this was an era where they had commercials, TV commercials, where stewardesses in the commercials or actresses playing stewardesses would say, "Fly me," and I'll let people connect the dots and interpret that sort of easily deciphered code in that respect. So she took the note and I think put it in her pocket, and the man who identified himself as Dan Cooper stated, "You better look at that note." And the note basically demanded at about three, I guess, areas of demand. The first, one of course was the money, $200,000 in $20 bills. Second was 4 parachutes. Or at least another demand was 4 parachutes. And the third was that it be refueled once the plane landed it landed at the Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Right. So SeaTac, as it's known. So roughly Seattle, although SeaTac is not Seattle. I know because I used to live in Seattle, which is probably one of the reasons I'm so interested in the Dan Cooper case. So let's go over those demands. He gives a note to Florence Schaffner. She looks at it. The demands are $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, including, I believe, it was 2 training chutes or something along that line, and that the plane be refueled once when they land at Seattle Tacoma Airport, which is where they landed.
Right.
So those are the demands. Of course, according to the note, no funny stuff or I'll do the job. And by the job, he also directed the stewardess to his attaché case, which is what he brought with him. He wasn't just attired in dark clothing, he also had an attaché case, and he opened this attaché case up. There appeared to be around possibly eight sticks of dynamite, or what appeared to be sticks of dynamite, with some wires and a battery or a couple batteries, at least a battery.
Right.
And reportedly, Cooper had demonstrated all he needed to do was connect this wire to this battery, or this part to that part, and he would be able to do the job.
Right.
Which gather would be blowing up the airline, or threaten to blow up the airline.
Right. So the threat here is, look, give me my money, we refuel the plane, and I get parachutes, $200,000 in $20 bills, or look in my attaché case, something that would be generally recognized, even in a cartoon, as a bomb. Here's my bomb, I'll blow you up. I mean, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now, he wasn't aggressive. He was pretty calm about all this and pretty smooth. Again, so the stewardess now is confronted with this, and what happened next?
So, okay, obviously the flight crew was, pilot, navigator, and co-pilot. They were informed. And so I believe they radioed, informing not only the tower, whatever available tower there was, but also allowing for law enforcement. In this case, the FBI, since this was a hijacking, they would have jurisdiction.
Right.
And so the FBI and I guess also local law enforcement, they met with the airline, and the decision was made by the airline, Northwest Orient, to pay the ransom. I think this is often done in the cases of hijacking. Mm-hmm. And so the money was got together. Now, here's what's important to know, and I guess I'll mention this later, or hopefully later. Only got a little less than 30, a little more than 30 minutes. But it should be noted that the flight itself was supposed to be, I believe, a half-hour flight, because you're going from Portland to Seattle. So it should have been at most maybe a half hour, slightly over a half hour, or a little less, right?
Okay.
What ended up happening was that the flight was in a kind of holding pattern over SeaTac, right? So they couldn't land the plane because they were waiting for the money to be gathered up and brought over, right?
Okay.
So the plane itself, which normally would have landed certainly in less than 2 hours, took about at least 2 hours to land eventually, and they landed at SeaTac Airport, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the money itself, Cooper's instructions were the money had to be, the bills themselves, as I mentioned before, the money was $200,000 in $20 bill.
Right. And
Cooper wanted the money to be random bills, not in a sequence, not sequential. So it couldn't be orderly. It had to be random notes or random bills, right? So from what I understand, the FBI and the authorities complied with that. But what they did was provide bills with a code, with the number or with serial numbers starting with F. So they would have that. And that would work for them because they would, that would allow them to know what the serial numbers, and the serial numbers were recorded by the FBI, right? So the money, I believe, if I recall correctly, and I hope I have this, I believe the money came from Seafirst Bank in Seattle, which was actually a bank that I used to bank at when I lived in Seattle.
Right.
So Seafirst Bank. I believe that was the bank that they got the money from. So, like I said, it took a while, so it took some time. Normally, that's a plane that would have landed a half hour. It took over 2 hours because they had to kind of have a holding pattern flyover. They land at SeaTac, right? And so they bring so of course they have law enforcement there. They bring the money and they bring the parachutes.
Right.
And I believe because I believe Tina Mucklow was, well, actually what they did was release the passengers. So the passengers got released. Now, reportedly, the passengers were not aware of that the flight was hijacked.
Right.
So, as I mentioned before, not only did this guy not draw any attention, because he's wearing basically what anyone would consider to be bland clothes. They were dark clothes, but bland. Just business attire.
Right.
You know, business suit with a clip-on tie with, I think, a mother of pearl clasp in the middle, and a dark trench coat, supposedly loafers from what I understand, but dark shoes.
Right.
So
now, a couple of notes.
He didn't pay attention.
No, a couple
and
of
they
notes
weren't aware
here.
that it was hijacked until afterwards when the FBI brought them in and spoke to the passengers.
Right. Now, I was just going to explain that this makes perfect sense with the time period, because what they didn't want to do is have a plane full of panicked people. So the decision was probably made by the airline, don't even let the passengers know. But they're up in a holding pattern, so probably getting mad, and a little antsy, but they get them down after being in the holding pattern. And just for the record, $200,000 in 1971 is, in today's money, is about $1.25 million. Okay? So this is not an insignificant amount of money, just so you know. I'm not telling you that, Mr. Lanier, I'm telling the audience, but it's way more than $200K, okay, in today's money.
Yeah.
That's the kind of purchasing power it had, and these arrangements were made. Now, the FBI grabbed up the passengers which were released, which was one of the concerns, always secured the civilians. Okay, this is very normal procedure. They did that, but they also wanted questions. Did you get a look at the guy? Do you know what was going on? Et cetera, et cetera. But they wanted it from these people that they take off of the plane immediately and probably direct them into a holding area. All right. So this all goes down, and they get the plane refueled. All right.
Yeah.
And it
was taking a while because, so they got the plane refueled. It was taking a while. It was a little antsy supposedly for Cooper, because it was clear they were trying to have some stalling tactics.
Right.
And finally they got the plane refueled and they took off. Passengers are gone. Florence Schaffner was advised, better dig out, better get out of here. So that left Tina Mucklow and the rest of the flight crew there, pilot, co-pilot, I believe, and navigator there, along with Tina Mucklow there. So go ahead.
Well, no, I was just saying, so now they've done this, they've tried to stall, they try to negotiate, they tried, whatever it is, they try their tactics. None of it worked. He gets back up in the air now with just the flight crew, effectively the majority of the flight crew still intact, and now the passengers have departed, and it's just him and those people on the plane, right? But he's still got the threat of the bomb, and he goes back up in the air. So now what happens?
So what happens is that Cooper announces that they're going to fly from SeaTac to Mexico City. So he wanted a non-stop flight,
right,
or direct flight to Mexico City. And he was advised, well, that's not going to be possible, even with refueling, having been refueled. They would need to refuel again.
Right.
Reportedly, Cooper suggested a few places to refuel, including, I understand, Sacramento and Phoenix, and the decision was made to refuel at Reno, Nevada.
Okay, now that comes. Now that comes from the statements of the flight crew afterwards, right? After they explained what went on, and he suggests there. So they're now turning their heading to go toward Nevada. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Then what?
Yeah. So what happens is that Cooper instructs Mucklow and the flight crew to remain in the cockpit. So he doesn't want anybody in the rest of the plane.
Right.
So reportedly, what Mucklow, when she went up, turned around and saw before she closed the door, closed the curtains, closed the door, was that he was Cooper was trying to attach something, put something around him, probably one of the parachutes and the money that he got.
Makes sense. Either he was securing the money to his body, or he was putting on the parachute. I don't think she knew clearly exactly what it was because she only got a quick glimpse, right?
Right, reportedly, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Correct. So, okay, now basically the plane itself, reportedly the crew's up in that cockpit. They don't see Cooper, and I believe there was no recording equipment, meaning no camera. I don't believe there was a camera on the plane. The plane, incidentally, was a 727, Boeing 727. Now, why is that significant? Because it allows for an aft stairwell to come down and to walk out of that aft stairwell, which clearly Cooper knew. Now, I will say this, as a part of his instructions, what Cooper wanted from the flight, reportedly to Mexico City, but refueling in Reno, what he wanted was for the flaps on the plane's wing, the wing flaps, to be set at 15 degrees. And he wanted to fly at 10,000 feet. So 10,000 feet flying altitude, and the flaps of the wings set at 15 degrees. These were per his instructions. And of course, he wanted to fly to Mexico City directly. Couldn't get that, so they were going to have to refuel in Reno, Nevada.
Right.
So the flight crew is in the cockpit, including Tina Muscle. They reportedly didn't see him, didn't talk to him, had nothing to do with him. There's no camera, I believe, that was there recording what was going on in the aisle, so don't know what he was doing. We assume that he was putting on the parachute. Again, assumption, unsupported in the note, because what occurred after 8 p.m., because they were up in the air, I think, at about 7:36, reportedly, when they left SeaTac. But after about 8 p.m., there was a kind of jostling or kind of an impact, and a light had gone on in the cockpit indicating the aft door was open.
Okay,
as I mentioned, the aft stairwell.
Right, so here's where it gets normalized, because what happens is you got all the flight crew, everybody else who's on the plane besides the suspect is now in the cockpit. And the plane, when you open a door on a plane, it causes turbulence, it causes a problem because of compression and all this. I mean, anybody could think about this and see, okay, the plane is going to get shook around a little bit, you open a door. Doesn't matter if it's an escape hatch or if it's the aft stairwell, whatever, but he used a stairwell, apparently, that comes off of the roof, the rear of the plane, okay, just to picture it in your minds. And no one else is with him, no one saw it happen, but they felt the results on the plane. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, what happens next in the story as far as we know?
As far as we know, they land in Reno, Nevada. FBI, local law enforcement, all there to meet the plane. They go on the plane. The flight crew is in the cockpit. The flight crew is there, and Cooper is gone.
And the money is gone.
And the money is gone. So Cooper took the money and 2 parachutes, including a Navy training chute, which could not open. Right?
Okay.
That's important to know. Would not open. So he took 2 parachutes with him, plus the money. He left behind his black clip-on tie, I think about 8 cigarette butts or a few cigarette butts, and of course a couple of the parachutes.
Right.
He took his attaché case with him. He took the note because he got that back from Sergeant Schaffner, which is interesting.
Yes.
And he took the money.
Right. So what they're left with at the end of the day is to search for fingerprints. They've got the cigarette butts. Of course, DNA evidence was not as it is today. And I've seen in later years that they attempted to test the cigarette butts for DNA. But this is what they have. That and a clip-on tie, effectively.
Right.
And that's all that remains. So you don't even get a handwriting sample out of the note because you only have the stewardess's word, the flight attendant's word. They used to call them stewardesses. The flight attendant's word that she saw the note, but other than that, that's it. You got a clip-on tie, the parachutes, which the law enforcement gave him anyway, 2 of them out of the 4. He took 2 with him. He took the money with him. The attaché case is gone, and that's it. So what do you got? Footprints, fingerprints, maybe. No money left behind, nothing else. That's it. And ever since, right, what has gone on ever since? We heard, obviously, this made some news at the time, and it was a fairly big deal, and I'm sure, and I've seen clips of it, that a manhunt ensued to see if they could find the guy who very likely jumped out of an airplane, right?
Right.
Okay,
right.
So what happens now?
Well, what happens is there's a search in Northwest Washington, right? Because the belief was that he jumped out somewhere between Washington and Oregon.
Right, because he's in the air 20-something minutes from Seattle. So they have an idea where the plane was, so they have an idea of a search area, so they narrowed it down to that and went. Right?
They tried searching, I guess, in the Lake Merwin area. Like I think there was a dam in the area, if I'm not mistaken.
There is a dam there. There's a waterway, which was very important because people have tried to search along that waterway. Matter of fact, today as we speak, jumping ahead, today as we speak, people still go to that area and search it to see if they can find some remnants of evidence. But please continue.
So you had that search go on, massive search there. But there were those who believed, I don't know if it was at the time, but maybe it's certainly later on, that wasn't the right area to search, is the Lake Merwin area. They may have thought that it would have been better to search near the Washougal River.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So that was what people thought. And so the belief later on, I believe, I don't know if it was at the time, but later on was that this may not have been the place, it may not have been the area where Cooper jumped out. Now, let me fast forward here. And several years later, a young kid, a boy, is with his family near the Columbia River.
Right.
And he comes across what are clearly deteriorated bills.
The remnants of multiple $20 bills are just kind of on the banks of a waterway, right? That this kid is accidentally just sort of digging around on the beach or the banks of a waterway, comes across money, right?
Right.
Or pieces of
so
money.
This was in an area called, I believe it was Pina Bar, right? And so this was near the Columbia River. And it was, I think, several miles from Vancouver, Washington.
Right.
So we have money. I think they found several $1,000s. I don't want to misstate the amount, but they found several $1,000s. Eventually, they found several $1,000s.
Eventually,
they looked
did.
at the what was that? The serial numbers, and the serial numbers matched the Cooper. I'll call it the Cooper ransom money, even though it was the plane being ransomed. If you could say it, but the Cooper ransom money. And so apparently this was the money. It was matched. It was the money that Cooper was given before he apparently left the plane.
Right, so accurately, here's what could be said. The kid found like a handful. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, the kid found a dozen $20 bills, pieces of them. It was reported to the authorities. They went in, conducted a more extensive search, and found a couple $1,000s. Again, the exact number, not sure, but a fraction of the 200,000 they found the remnants of. And there were many, many matches to the many, many serial numbers that the FBI had logged. And ever since, by the way, here's part of a punchline, and I don't know if you're going to get to this, about how the FBI has a list of serialized, bills that were done in many transactions, not just this case, where if they are spent, if they're returned to a bank at some point, it automatically gets, relayed to the FBI. Hey, we found money that was tied to something. Now, they often do use sequential bills so that they can report to an agency or the public that, look, between this number and this number, you've got a bill that was involved here. But in this case, he did request the random bills. They did consent to that and delivered that to him. And here we go. Now, problem though, what else has ever been found that we know for certain is tied to this case? Because there could be a parachute. There could be this individual turning up somewhere, spending some of the money. There could be a body. Let's just say he didn't survive the jump. Okay? What else has ever turned up, Mr. Lanier, to your knowledge?
Well, the money's turned up.
Mm-hmm. Some of it. Some of it.
Yeah, some of the money. That's the major thing that's turned up.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, when you mentioned in search of, they had noted that someone had found like a placard, a sign, that apparently came from a 727.
Yeah.
Somewhere in a wooded area. Those two aspects are what I've heard that have come up. But we don't have anything that identifies who this Dan Cooper was definitively. And so he remains an unidentified
suspect.
Well, not suspect. Oh, he's an unsolved, right?
Unknown subject. Okay, unknown subject. That's even better. Okay. But the key thing here, though, is that outside of, and that placard, I don't know if that's legitimately connected to the case or not. That was an allegation, and frankly, I've never seen it really followed up on, but I do remember that also because I have that kind of memory. And this money, yes, some of it was found, but it's not as though all of the ransom money was ever found, and curiously enough, even though it's been more than 50 years, it's never turned up as money being returned to the bank, so it appears as though outside of the money that was recovered, none of it was ever spent. There was no parachute that was abandoned. There was nobody found a trench coat that somebody could tie to this because the guy was wearing a trench coat, right? So no clothing, no biological material, no money turning back up. This guy, effectively, and this is why the mystery persists, has vanished, right? I mean, pretty much.
Yeah, there's no body found. If he died, where's the body, right? Where's the corpse? Where are the remains?
Well, no corpse, and nobody's ever found, blood. Like, let's just say the guy got injured, right? He could have hit a tree, on his way down. I mean, you're parachuting in the dark from a plane, all right? I mean, there's a lot of things, and the guy's never been found, cited. There's no blood. There's no, in other words, that's it.
Yeah. So, in looking at this case, when I wrote my initial piece on it for my blog, I look at both ends, meaning if he had lived and if he had died. So if he had lived, you have to look at it, you have to start asking yourself some questions, right? If he had lived, you start asking, is it possible for him to have lived?
Mm-hmm.
It's possible, barely. He was jumping out of a plane that at the time had 200-mile-per-hour winds blowing as the plane was flying. The plane's at a 10,000 mile altitude, right?
Right, as you described, at 10,000 feet, which is...
point that needs to be brought up is that there were also jets trailing the plane that had been scrambled from McCord Air Force Base.
Right,
That's
but...
one of the things that the Search Of episode notes.
Right, but the point here is that it's a tough jump, but it is not unsurvivable, but it's also not like a clean, easy, it's not the kind of thing that you sign up for and you go on a weekend and you jump out of a plane either. It's not easy like that. So you have a distinctly dangerous jump. There is no evidence that he survived, but there's also equally, in my mind, no evidence that he didn't. So, here we go. A guy just effectively vanished as he jumped out of a plane as far as we are concerned, because there has been nothing found to definitively tie back to this. Now, the curious thing, in my mind, is that none of the money has ever turned up, right, as far as we know, outside of this small amount, right, that was, again, deteriorated because it was, 20 years later that this kid found this? I forget exactly how long after the actual event this money was found. Do you recall exactly?
Like 80, that it was several years later, like 8 years later, or several years later, right? So it was about 1980 or so that the money was found.
Okay, so it wasn't quite as long away from the event as I thought. See, I'm not an expert on this. I do recall watching it and paying attention to some of this because it is a fascinating case. I mean, now, here's where we get into a weird area, and I'm going to just let you run with the rest of our time here after I ask this question. I'm going to shut up because, honestly, we could go on for the next 3 hours with what I'm going to ask you, but here it is. Ever after we have now been confronted with alleged confessions, alleged information, well, I happen to know that this person was a member of my family because, even going so far as in the past couple of years only, an allegation has come forward that perhaps D.B. Cooper was not even a man, or Dan Cooper was not even a man, that indeed there's this one guy out there saying that his mother, I guess, or his stepmother or something, may indeed have been the infamous D.B. Cooper or Dan Cooper, which would be fascinating, but again, there is a strange element here because the money's never turned up. We haven't had a deathbed confession from somebody, although there was one at one point where a guy who was dying claimed that he was Dan Cooper, and I believe it's been thoroughly debunked. But I am unsure as to all of these other claims, and there have been many, because especially locally, it's been a very serious, point of fascination, point of curiosity for the locals for sure. I mean, there's even a sort of subculture of tourism that is built around, just like any event. You know, if you're in the woods where Bigfoot's been sighted, people will come by and buy Bigfoot stuff. You know what I mean? Just because they're exploring, they're going there to look for themselves. There are people that have gone to these areas, and that area in particular, just let's see if we can find D.B. Cooper somehow, right? So there's that element of it, but there's been various investigations, both by the authorities and by private citizens, to try and tie something definitively to this story, because we don't have any sort of conclusion here. It's just the hanging mystery, and it's not like many other things where we know the end result, we know how effectively, in a way, it is a successful ransom and hijacking.
Right.
But in another way, it's not, because we don't know for sure that money ever went anywhere. I have my suspicions about it, and they are unusual compared to most people who talk about this, but I've never known what to make of it. So where do you go with the story once you've laid out the mystery? I mean, again, you're doing this in a short form, and it's going to be on your YouTube channel, right?
It's already on there, so I already have an episode of Looking Into where I deal with Dan Cooper. It's called Dan Cooper. Looking Into Dan Cooper.
Looking Into Dan Cooper is on your YouTube channel, but I mean, you could spend the next 5 years probably making YouTube videos about all the things that have happened regarding this case.
Right.
So yeah.
When we look at Cooper, here's the way that I've viewed it, and you try to look at it in as logical a way as possible. Again, what I do is I look at both aspects of possibility. The problem that I have with a lot of documentaries, a lot of TV show segments, a lot of people who look into this is they're fixated on suspects. I'm not. Robert Rackstraw, Kenny Christensen, what's his name? McCoy. I don't care about all of those suspects because no matter what you bring up to me, at the end of the day, you have to look at what reportedly occurred. And again, I cite the word reportedly. You have to look at the fact that here is a man, and again, you have to look at both aspects. If he survived and if he died. If he survived, he would have had to parachute at night into an area that might have been a forest, might have been densely forested, if he avoided the water, if he didn't have a water landing, as they call it. Normally they say that about planes. Right. But if he didn't land in the water. And that's probably how people thought he died. Which is what he would have had to land into the forest, he would have had to land into some rough terrain and be able to survive until he was able to get out of there.
Right.
The second aspect is...
Well, hold on 1 second, though, because landing in a forest before you even get to the water, guess what? As I brought up before, he could have hit trees on the way down, too. Now, I know you got a parachute, but there are people who get killed striking trees, branches, limbs, all the way down. There's a possibility there that he never even hit the ground or the water because you can easily get hung up in a tree, right?
Right.
Okay.
And that gets into, again, the possibility he could have hit a tree
mm-hmm.
and been killed, and the possibility he could have hit the water and been killed. But if we posit that he survived, that he managed to make it,
right,
he probably would have been in some form of terrain.
mm-hmm.
It's not like that he landed smack dab in the middle of a town or a city.
No, and
probably
kind of bolstering that. Is that there, this was definitely a hot news story, and people in that area might have been on the alert. And I'm certainly believing that if somebody landed in the middle of a town on foot, and there wasn't a car waiting for them, right? They would have had to have been spotted by somebody somewhere, even if it was just a gas station, to go hit a bathroom or something. It doesn't matter. So, populated area, not likely. Rougher terrain, likely, but no evidence. Still, we've never found the chute. We've never found the body. Again, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, again, we look at if he survived. If he had lived, he would have had to land in whatever the terrain was, probably rough, probably densely forested terrain, and been able to survive until such time as he was able to extricate himself out of there.
Right.
The second hypothesis is that he died. So we covered a little of that he hit a tree and was killed, or some part of the forest, or hit the ground and was killed.
Right.
That he went into the water and was killed. That would explain no parachute, possibly, although there should have been some chute found, why there was no body found.
Right.
Could have gone down. But here's the second part of if he died that I cite and that I brought up.
Okay.
If he died, I believe that his purpose, if it was that he died, that his purpose in going on the plane in this scenario, or in this option, was that he intended to hijack the plane because he intended to commit suicide. That would make sense if he died, because you look at his clothing, he's wearing a suit.
Mm-hmm.
If you intend to jump from a plane or make any kind of parachute jump, you're not going to be wearing not only a trench coat, or you're not going to be wearing either a trench coat and a business suit
mm-hmm.
and loafers to
right.
jump from an airplane. That's just not done. He would be more informally attired if he was really intent on jumping, I believe, and surviving. So if he died, I believe that he intended to commit suicide in this. So again, I look at both scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the final thing that I will cite in regards to Cooper, my final take on it.
Okay.
The whole thing to me, to a great extent, strikes me as a beta test. My suspicion has been that Cooper himself, this man, he had stated to, I think it was a flight attendant, that he didn't have a grudge against the airline, but he had a grudge. Mm-hmm. I believe this man possibly could have been a government employee or an employee of a federal agency of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
The impression I get, possibly intelligence, but not, this isn't a guarantee. That would explain certain things to me. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing to me strikes me, and this is where people might disagree with me, the whole thing, the whole hijacking strikes me as a sort of beta test.
Mm-hmm.
All the details, the way everything is, $200,000 in ransom money, 4 parachutes, refuel, making sure that the fact that he wore clothing that would not distinguish him from anyone else, that would make him inconspicuous, relatively, that he wasn't really noticed, that he didn't make an impression on the passenger,
right,
for the most part, that they didn't know that it was hijacked.
Right.
This all strikes me as a sort of beyond, not just not a dress rehearsal, but an actual beta test of a hijacking. Keep in mind, during the period, you had a number of hijackings occur from about, again, 1968 to 72.
Right.
Well over 100. And so the whole hijacking orchestrated by this man who called himself Dan Cooper strikes me as a beta test, an ultimate beta test.
So let me ask you a question about that.
But,
because here's one problem I have with that scenario just off the top of my head. And that is that if it were as such, then I would think that the agency responsible for such a thing would have spoon-fed a better conclusion and not left an open mystery. You know, just wheeled out, listen, we found the body, we know who it is, and, you know, it was some disgruntled whatever, and created a cover story so that there would be no mystery, and there would be no reason for the public to think about it anymore, and it would have disappeared in the annals of history and no longer been a topic of discussion. So I'm just thinking... Yeah.
But here's something that gets to what you said earlier. You said that this was basically a successful hijack. And think about it. All the basic elements, you know, you could argue about the refueling, try to stall, but all the basic elements went pretty much as scheduled. And we do not have anyone who is identified as a hijacker. We don't know who he is. We don't know where he came from. We don't know what he was all about, whether this is political or economic. Everything in this hijacking strikes me as entirely a formula.
Yeah.
And it was a formula that was executed as well as possible by this individual who called himself Dan Cooper.
Right.
And so I believe that this was, in my view, a kind of beta test. Who pulled off the beta test remains a mystery, and who is behind it remains a mystery.
See, now,
but that, at this point, is my assessment.
Yeah, no, and you know what? If we change it from the idea that this was somebody who was directly working for a government agency, it could have been all sorts of a test on a different level, and the fact is that something did go wrong, which is why there is a mystery left, because at the end of it...
Or did it go wrong?
Well,
think about it. Did it go wrong?
Well, the only thing that went wrong is the escape. Right? So, okay, we've learned we can get around all of the other issues here, right? The sequential bills, okay, that's intentional. The fact that we were able to get them to comply, come up with the money. Everything else is successful up until the escape, which we don't know the answer to. In which case, if this was done by someone who was not part of the U.S. government apparatus, right? And this was a test to see about future events, and, you know, okay, they lost their guy, and he died. Well, somebody goes, picks up the corpse, picks up the money, and buries it all somewhere, right? Okay, well, we lost them. We didn't want to lose them, because maybe it would have been different had they been able to land in Mexico City without another refueling, because the assessment might have been made by the individual that refueling will be the point at which they will make a move on us. I'm gonna get stormed there. That'll definitely be the end. At least I have a fighting chance if I jump. So that could be. Yeah.
Let me just conclude with this.
Sure.
When I look at all these elements, I don't believe the money was important, which is why some of it was found at Tina Bar. It found near the Columbia River. I don't believe that the element in regards to the parachute was that very different. Again, when I look at all of these details, the only thing that's a little odd is that the tie was left. The tie was left. It makes sense. This guy had planned this fairly well, or to such an extent that it was fairly executed, but the tie was left. Right? Why leave the tie? But again, in conclusion, I sum up, I look at this and I say, in my view, this was a beta test.
Gotcha.
This is a beta test by somebody who I believe worked for an agency of the federal government and was carried out maybe under some auspices, possibly, but to some extent. Okay. Everything about this just works out to such an extent.
Well,
the fact that he's never been identified,
right,
and we don't know who he is, is what confirms it for me.
Well, fair enough. I will end this segment of my show tonight on this question to you then, and you can just give me a yes or a no, or you can give me some hints, whatever you want, but here it is. Are you planning on following up on this story a bit more and maybe doing a little investigation? I mean, I'm not saying that you got plans for a particular media thing that you're going to do or whatever, but do you think that you personally will follow up on this story some more and see if maybe, just maybe, you as a journalist can do an investigation a little bit here and come up with more facts maybe that the public is either not aware of or stuff that they are only, not widely aware of, maybe some rarefied information or unknown information. Are you going to pursue this further, is the question.
I have no plans to pursue it further, but if things come my way, who knows? We'll see.
Well, that's a good way to look at it. And I'll tell you this, I think if somebody was willing to make a connection with you and say, hey, look, Albert Lanier, I will fund your investigation, maybe you would consider that too, right? I mean, if somebody wants to give you expenses, go solve D.B. Cooper.
Right.
What do you think?
Right. Let's make a deal.
All right. Albert Lanier, again, veteran journalist. He's been on the show many times discussing many things. I think I'm going to have to invite him back a lot more often this year and get into some more of these true crime things that he's following up on his YouTube channel, which is, one more time, what is the address on YouTube?
I believe the exact address is Writer Albert Lanier. I think at Writer Albert Lanier 3434. I think that's if you want to go to it directly. But it's Writer Albert Lanier if you're going to search it.
No problem. Writer Albert Lanier, and that's Lanier. And I'll give you guys direct links to everything so that you can follow up and see for yourselves. And go ahead and continue to learn. Dan Cooper, or D.B. Cooper as he's better known, but the suspect, the unsub, as Albert Lanier said, is definitely Dan Cooper. And there you go. You can follow up on that on his YouTube channel and take a look at the other stuff that Albert Lanier has done over the years. I do suggest going over to Medium.com and checking out At the Dr. 50, some material about D.B. Cooper over there and many other topics. Thank you, Mr. Lanier, for doing this with us tonight.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
Excellent.
A great deal.
And we'll do more in the future. The Ochelli Effect will return after this with current investigative journalist, Addie Ads. Stick around.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
You're listening to the Ochelli.com radio network.
Revelation through conversation.
The War State by Michael Swanson explains the great national transformation that took place and put the Kennedy presidency in the context of the times and reveals never-before published information about the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy would not have been assassinated if he had been president 200 years ago. His assassination took place in the context of the Cold War and the rise of the national security state. Before World War II, the United States was a continental republic. In the decade that followed, it became an imperial superpower. Generals such as Curtis LeMay not only wanted to invade Cuba, but knew that there were short-range missiles on the island armed with nuclear warheads that they could not destroy because they were on mobile launchers. Their invasion could have led to a third world war, and they wanted to go to war anyway. The War State by Michael Swanson reveals why and will show you what President Kennedy was up against. For more information, thewarstate.com.
For as little as $50 a month, you can buy an ad for your business, podcast, book, or any message you want heard on one or more of the Ochelli.com shows. To find out more, contact ads@Ochelli.com. That's ADS at Ochelli.com. Be heard with us. Revelation through conversation. Ochelli.com.
This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and you're listening to The Ochelli Effect at Ochelli.com.
Ochelli.com.
Bad prophet of the airways.
I am here every Thursday, 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock Pacific time, right here on the Ochelli Radio Network, which is really one of the most, I think it's the gem in the landscape of media today. Please donate, buy a coffee and some smokes for my man, my producer, and the owner of this network, Chuck, today by donating at Ochelli.com. Keep it alive. Keep it alive.
Ochelli.com.
Revelation through conversation.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com, enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it, by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks by Larry Hancock. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. Larry Hancock's book, In Denial, rips the cover off many of them. Using new files, it exposes things about the Bay of Pigs that no one has ever written about before. It shows why it really failed and why the United States did not learn from it. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. It also shows why other countries today are doing secret operations with more success. This is the book that puts what some want to deny into the light. In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks. Larry Hancock. For more information, go to larry-hancock.com. Pick up your copy of In Denial at Amazon.com in digital or physical form.
Ochelli.com.
Okay, for live listeners at Ochelli.com, here's the deal. I'm having trouble hooking up with Addy Ads, and I may have to return to this at a later time tonight and see if we can't get it done. Great segment with Albert Lanier in the first hour, but my planned segment for this hour is with the investigative journalist Addy Ads. And, we were going to do a thing via video and also simulcast on Ochelli.com. And I'm not sure if I've somehow got wires crossed with time or whatever else. I thought he was going to send me a StreamYard link, and I don't have one. So I'm going to make a couple more attempts and try the cell phone I have for him again. But frankly, we played a long song during the break and everything because no Addy Ads as of yet. So I think I'll break live stream now and let it go. But you may hear within the next little while a conversation between myself and Addy Ads. If not today, I'll do it another time. But anyway, could be that I don't have a guest. So there you go. And tomorrow night, let's see, who do we have tomorrow night? Tomorrow night we'll be talking to Mr. Hamachek about Dr. Zelenko and the great COVID-1984 deception. Okay? So that is what is coming up on tomorrow night's show. And that might indeed go the full 2 hours, honestly. So we'll have to see how it goes there. But what is his name? Dean? I forget his name. Let me go look at his first name, actually. I better get that straight before tomorrow, huh? But Hamachek, anyways, is the guy who's going to be on tomorrow and about his book regarding Dr. Zelenko and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we have some interesting guests coming up this week. Let's see, Wednesday, I have Murray Sabrin coming back. He's a guy who ran for governor in New Jersey on the Libertarian ticket many years ago, but apparently heads a whole organization, continues to teach at Ramapo College and all that. So we'll be making all those moves in this week. And starting in a couple of weeks, you're going to start to get classic replays from the Ochelli.com archives. And going to come up with a way to offer those for sale, too. If you wanted to complete, the first 10 years of the Ochelli Effect, Ochelli.com, and all that. Going to have a couple of packages coming up, so if you actually want archives, people don't have to keep asking me for them, and I email them to them, and can you put this back up on a video channel somewhere? We're going to get rid of all that and just have it so that you want them, you can get them, and support the network while you're doing it. Still investigating exactly what kind of thumb drives and all that. But those announcements will be coming up sometime between now and my birthday, which is April 7th. So in somewhere in that pocket of time, if you will, we're going to come up with a mechanism by which you'll be able to obtain the network's archives, mine, the shows I produced, etc., 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 plus the ads program and all that. So things are going to change. The sound of the network, the organization of the network. Chris Graves going to 3 days a week. Aaron's still on Sundays. We'll see about that in the near future, but he appears comfortable there. And my show back to putting out new or rare material, one way or another. Something that you can't get online elsewhere will come out of the Ochelli Effect podcast feed and my show in general. I might actually start that whole process off with playing the very first live show that was under the banner of the Ochelli Effect, which happened in February of 2014. I made podcasts the year before and quickly decided that I didn't want to deal with podcast distribution like I do today. I wanted to do a live radio show, and maybe I'll tell a brief story about that along with the very first show that was broadcast live under the Ochelli Effect. I actually went live to another radio show, my first internet broadcast, but total disaster, sub-hosting for somebody when I hadn't even hosted my own show yet, live online. Total disaster, everything locked up, I had problems, it was a whole thing. But you guys might be able to hear me just struggle on air with material that isn't even my own on somebody's show that I totally ruined the first day I went live. And that anniversary of that very first show is coming up. So maybe a couple of days before we'll release the very first show so that you'll have it. Because that very first show happened on February 15 of 2014. anyways, all that having been said and me stalling for time trying to see if I could hook up with Addy Ads, get a message to him. I hope everything's okay with Addy Ads, and don't worry, you'll hear from him again on the show soon enough. But for tonight, I think that's that. And so no matter who you are, where you are, or when you are, I want you to remember that I am merely Ochelli. All of you are indeed the effect. Good night.
Snowflake ass got kicked at that peaceful protest last night. You ain't seen nothing yet. Ochelli.com.
Mad prophet of the airways.
I am here every Thursday, 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock Pacific time, right here on the Ochelli Radio Network, which is really one of the most, I think it's the gem in the landscape of media today. Please donate, buy a coffee and some smokes for my man, my producer, and the owner of this network, Chuck, today by donating at Ochelli.com. Keep it alive. Keep it alive.
Ochelli.com.
Revelation through comprehension.
For as little as $50 a month, you can buy an ad for your business, podcast, book, or any message you want heard on one or more of the Ochelli.com shows. To find out more, contact ads at Ochelli.com. That's ADS at Ochelli.com. Be heard with us. Revelation through conversation. Ochelli.com.